Welcome to Beyond Food and Wine, a Cordon Bleu podcast. In this podcast, we get some real insight into the food and hospitality industry from a variety of renowned chefs, industry experts, and Le Cordon Bleu alumni. Join us as we hear the fascinating stories and unique experiences behind some of the best-known names in the industry. Hello and welcome to the show. I'm delighted today to be joined by Aaron Thomas, who is COO and co-founder of Yumbug. Welcome, Aaron. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Can you tell me a little bit about your role, what you do at Yumbug?
So obviously I'm one of the co-founders. So I'm one of the people that started this business. Throughout my time, I've done many different things, but my main focus at the moment is building the supply chain for creating our delicious cricket-based meats and organising anything operational to do with the restaurant predominantly. I'm kind of GM over the restaurant right now, actually.
Fantastic. And can you tell me a little bit about your background? Because it's not necessarily in the culinary world.
It is not. So my co-founder and I, Leo, have no professional training in cooking, but we are both avid home cooks. But my previous experience is actually mainly in insect science, so entomology. I studied at University of East Anglia, and then my previous job before this was actually at the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine, developing technologies to help us control insects in natural environment, predominantly things like mosquitoes, like bearers of disease vectors of disease. And bed bugs, which I know has been more topical in recent years as well.
Yeah, definitely.
Amongst other things. So that's predominantly my background is actually in insects before. I was always a bug guy, basically.
No, it's really, really interesting. And so what drew you to towards the culinary world, towards hospitality, and when did you decide to eat a bug first?
It's a good question. So obviously I was aware of insects in general, like pretty knowledgeable about them, but actually it took me a while to really understand all of the benefits associated with consuming them, because it wasn't until I got into university that I started reading through research papers talking about how many other countries around the world already eat insects. Around 80% of the world's countries have traditions around eating them. And also the benefits associated with them. So that's sustainability wise, them being incredibly sustainable for the environment, but also nutritionally. So dried crickets can be up to 70% protein, for example. They have more iron than spinach, more calcium than milk, more potassium than bananas, more fiber than brown rice. So that they really are a superfood that we can also feed off stuff that we throw away, which is way better than our existing traditionally farmed animal system.
Definitely.
So for me, after I'd learned about all these benefits and the fact that so many other countries were already doing it, I felt like it was kind of my responsibility to start telling other people about it. And I kind of became not just that weird sciencey bug dude, but that dude that's also pressuring you to try and eat bugs at parties. So that's kind of where it all started for me, was actually during university. And I just started educating people around me in my community and just anyone that I know, basically. Including my family, who unfortunately had to go through some really poor initial edible insect-based meals that I cooked for them. But that's really where it started. And what was driving me really was, and same for Leo, I think, was just wanting to have a positive impact on the planet through this really underutilized food source. And we saw potential in for the UK or like a Western audience.
Fantastic. And would you say that on a sort of similar level to, say, plant-based proteins, that insect protein has a really important role to play in changing our food systems and how we approach food?
It's a great question. I think the way that we think about the future of food, and particularly what we're really talking about is protein mainly, our protein sources, when we were talking about insects generally, in comparison to other plant-based sources, is that we see there being a whole range of different types of sustainable, healthy choices. Everything from whole food, plant-based proteins to more processed plant-based proteins to lab-grown meats to all sorts. And we just think that insects are one of those options. And each one is going to have all sorts of different pros and cons. Insects might be better than some of those other protein sources for nutritional quality, for sustainability. It depends on exactly what we're talking about and which types of insects we're farming, which types of plants we're farming and processing. So it's just an option for people to then choose from. But we think it's a really important one that people should be considering seriously.
Yeah, definitely. So obviously you mentioned that there was a fair amount of trial and error in discovering how best to work with insects as a meat. And now that you've kind of gotten to a stage where you're familiar, is it much like working with other kinds of meat?
Yes, it is, broadly speaking. It depends again what type of product we're talking about. If we're just talking about the whole crickets themselves, the most similar thing that you could say they were like to would be like a shellfish, because they're actually not too unrelated. If you're allergic to shellfish, there's an 80% chance you're also allergic to crickets or some other insect species, again, depending on the insect species. But if we're talking about the meat products that we've made, generally we try to make them in a way that one thing to say is that they are still an animal protein, so they cook similarly to other animal proteins. I wouldn't say it's exactly the same, but it's similar. And what we're trying to do is create products that are familiar to people, both in terms of taste and texture, but also in how they cook up. So that is actually something that we're looking to optimize for when we're making these types of foods. But broadly speaking, yes, they're pretty similar to most other products that you'd cook with, animal ones. Sorry.
And can you tell me about the journey that it took from being, in was it your garage?
So it was Leo's parents' garage.
In a garage doing recipe meal kits to opening a full-blown restaurant.
It's been a winding road, but where we started was really... So I was living in Norwich, Leo was living in London. His parents was equidistant between us, and it was where we basically met up on weekends to cook in their garage. The reason why we were using the garage was because his mum has only recently actually ever tried some of our food. Although she is actually Thai, for whatever reason, she was just really against the idea. So she wouldn't have us use any of the kitchen utensils or be in the kitchen with our creations. So maybe for good reason at that stage, because we weren't great at cooking. But what we were doing was really experimenting with the raw form of insects, like frozen whole insects, dried powders, all sorts of stuff, and just trying to understand how to use them best and to create content to help educate other people around it. Since then, we launched a recipe kit during lockdown, as most other people actually did as well. There was about 100 different recipe kits launched during lockdown, I'm sure. But ours just contained superfood insects. What we found is that there is a small budding community of real insect advocates in the UK, but that group of people find it quite difficult to convince others to get involved in the space, because most of the time they haven't gone into as much research and detail, might not be as good as chefs as we have here in the restaurant now, or be as knowledgeable as Leo and I about this space and why it's good for the planet and good for you. So I think we were trying to arm those people with that information, but it was still proving quite difficult to get people over the line. So what we decided to do is develop a range of products that actually suited the mass market a little bit more, to basically make it more appealing and more acceptable to the mainstream early on, so that we can get wider adoption basically. And in that process, we started to sell to small restaurants, and then we started to speak to larger restaurants. And one of the funny things as you'd probably imagine with large restaurants, is it takes a while for them to adopt new things onto their menu. Even if you're something as basic as just another wine supplier or something. There is a whole vendoring process that it goes through for a chain that has 100 plus locations. So in that meantime, whilst we've been waiting for those larger chains to come on, for our products to come online, we decided, let's trial actually doing our own restaurant and see how that does, because we'd already had good uptake in some of the smaller restaurants and from customers that we've been sampling with, and at festivals, for example. So we did that in November, and it did really well. We were only open for 3 weeks, completely sold out. We got into Good Morning Britain and all sorts of other stuff. So it was it was one of the best things we've ever done in terms of marketing, I think. It was really good. And that gave us the confidence basically to decide to actually open up our own place permanently, which is where we're sitting right now. So yeah, that's kind of the journey of how we got to here. There's still hopefully lots more to go,
Absolutely.
Including those launches into larger chains, which is hopefully coming soon.
Absolutely. Well, fingers crossed.
Yeah.
I mean, it smells wonderful, so, you know.
Thank you.
And so kind of touched on it just now, but do you think that people see eating insects more as a novelty, or do you see it potentially, I mean, I guess it's your mission to kind of transition into the mainstream, and kind of how close do you think that is?
It's a really good, that is the $1 million question, pretty much. It's always been kind of an issue we've seen with the space over the years. Looking back historically, the people have kind of pigeonholed insects into this kind of novelty. We've been calling it like the novelty crisis, basically. But within the industry, like that's consistently been how people are viewing the sector. And unfortunately, a lot of companies have tried to release products that actually are tailored too much into that novelty aspect. And what we've really tried to do is create something that might attract some people just for the novelty of it, but when people come into this restaurant, for example, we are hoping that the food is way better than they imagine. It's definitely good enough for them to just come back to try the food. Even if it didn't contain insects in it, they would come back just for the food as it was. So it provides value just over the novelty aspect. I can't deny that having the novelty aspect definitely also helps, because people will just come in to try for the first time anyway. But then, fortunately, hopefully they like the food well enough to want to come back again. But that novelty aspect still pays off, because it might be they come with one group of people one day, and then the next week they come with an entirely different group. But they become kind of an advocate for what we're doing and bringing other people in and giving them an experience around it. I think one of the amazing things about this restaurant, and some other restaurants do it really well, is that you're not just serving amazing food, but you're giving people a story to discuss around the table about, oh, when did you first eat an insect? And like, oh, what did you like about this type of way they prepared it, etc. So it's, I mean, that happens in other restaurants, but I think because we're doing something quite unusual, there's a lot of like social currency in inviting someone here as an experience.
Yeah, definitely.
Which not every other restaurant has.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's, you know, that kind of fine line between gimmick and actual good food that you seem to be walking quite nicely, you know, playing each off the other.
Yep.
Bring them in with a novelty and then keep them for the good food.
Yes.
So I like it. And what kind of reaction have you had from the public, positive and negative?
Sure. We actually give feedback to everyone that comes into the restaurant, so we have a record of what people have been saying. I think our current like net promoter score, if you guys use that term, is how likely someone is to recommend this place to a friend.
Yeah.
We're sitting above 9.7 pretty much consistently every week at the moment, which is a pretty good indication.
Yeah.
Generally, the feedback gets amazing. The food, gets amazing feedback. There's been a couple of like comments on specific dishes, be like, oh, I didn't like the avocado or something,
right, okay.
which often isn't to do with the actual insects themselves, which is funny. As you'd imagine with every restaurant, there are just some dishes that people don't like.
Absolutely.
Wild mushrooms are a bit too earthy for me, those kind of things. But broadly speaking, the feedback that we get is always really, really good. I think people generally have a good time here, particularly because Leo and I are also running service. So if anyone has any questions, they get to speak to a founder that knows a lot about the space and can really help educate them about the food that they're eating, but also about the reasons why. And I think that's really important in helping people with this experience.
Absolutely. I mean, that must make a huge difference to diners, definitely. Good idea. So mostly positive, I guess, then.
Yes. Yeah. The only negative things that we have got, I think, are, I don't know if I really want to go too much into it, but there's like a huge conspiracy, predominantly in the US, around the WEF, like trying to force us to eat bugs whilst they eat steaks in the high towers. But I don't really know what to say. No. We're not associated with Klaus Schwab by any means. We believe in insects because they're an incredibly sustainable, nutritious source of food, and 80% of the world's countries do it already. We're not trying to force some agenda on people.
No, of course. I mean, if it exists, there'll be a conspiracy theory about it. So I think that's fair. Yeah. I wouldn't take it personally.
Yep.
What about fellow chefs in the industry? What's the kind of industry opinion about insect-led cuisine?
What is amazing is that actually for our pop-up late last year, we partnered with some amazing chefs from major brands across the UK, including the next MasterChef winner, head of food at Brewdog, a head of food at, I forget the pizza chain, but he was also head of food at Nando's, head of food at Salad Project. So basically some really well-known chefs that create amazing food on their own restaurant menus. All of them had amazing things to say about the product. I wish I could have shown the video to you, but we basically filmed a video of them doing interviews about the product and amazing feedback, basically. All of them say they believe that this is one of the futures of food, that it's a great idea because it's so sustainable, it's so nutritious, it works like similarly to meat, it's got a similar Maillard reaction, so it like crisps up on the outside. Yeah, I think all of them really enjoyed having something new and interesting to play around with in the kitchen, and they helped us then design that pop-up restaurant menu, which is really cool because then people got to try their creations at the restaurant.
Brilliant. And any kind of promise in bringing on the products?
Onto the restaurants.
Yeah.
And some of them we're still in discussion, which is why the reason why we're in contact with them for the pop-up was because we were already speaking to them about potentially being on their restaurant. It was a nice turn of events because usually it's asking something for them to do on their menu, but this time it was actually, no, how about you come into our restaurant and do something with us, which is really nice. But yes, we're still in discussions with some of those. Yeah, can't disclose names right now.
No. I mean, it's early days, and I think it seems like the horizon is quite bright. So
yes,
we'll keep our fingers crossed. So the food, from what I've seen, it looks amazing and it smells delicious. What are some of your favourites on the menu?
It's a good question. My favourites on the menu are probably the kebab has consistently been a favourite of mine, simply because it's one of those dishes where you're getting a relatively large amount of cricket-based meat. So if you really want to experience what cricket meat is like, just on its own, without any other elements, etc., that is the perfect dish for it because you're getting quite a lot of meat there. In addition, I love Middle Eastern food and chilies, etc. Got a really nice hot chili sauce on there.
Nice.
So that's a favourite of mine. Tacos, for the same reason, you're getting a huge bit of cricket brisket on the top. I'm a huge fan of Mexican food. We've got our own mole in-house as well, which is really nice. And a rhubarb hot sauce, which is, again, as you can see, chili is kind of a thing with Leo and I.
Same.
And we have a really good onion bhajis as well. I'd have to say that as well. Yeah.
Nice. What's the cricket component in the onion bhajis?
So we've actually put cricket brisket again through the onion bhaji mix. So you've got bits of meat within the bhaji itself, which is quite cool.
That sounds great. So what can visitors expect when they're on their first visit to Yumbug?
It will be a mixture. I think most people come in with the idea that they're probably going to get a huge locust on a stick. Most likely that's not what you're going to get. The crickets that we use are relatively small, so just to make sure that people's expectations are aligned to what they're about to experience. I think most people are, regardless of that, are still a bit apprehensive about what the food is actually going to be like. But as I said before, the food is honestly amazing. You could choose anything on the menu and enjoy it. I think what we've tried to do is create a really nice, warm, friendly atmosphere with how we're running service and being able to speak with customers at length about whatever questions they have. So I just expect a relatively relaxed, educational, if you want it, vibe. You can even come and chat to the chefs. They're very open for you to come and see how they're preparing stuff as well. So I think for a lot of people, it's a really fun experience that isn't just centered around the food, but also other things such as education and interactions with our amazing team.
Yeah, obviously when you're not open at the moment, but sitting here, it feels like a nice environment, very welcoming. I think, I'll definitely be back when you're open. So what one thing would you say to anyone who is hesitant to try insects for whatever reason, and what kind of, what in the past has kind of tipped people over into saying yes?
It's interesting because I don't know if there's anything. There's a few things that I could say that could help, which would be things around the reasons why you'd want to eat insects. How many people around the world already do it? As I said, 80% of the world's countries. So you're not going to be alone if you're the first person that tries this stuff. And as I said before, the feedback has been amazing. But I think what really does wonders is actually just showing how good the food can look, and not showing stuff that is immediately scary or squeamish inducing has done absolute wonders for the industry, because I think a lot of the time, as I said before, people that are coming in expecting a whole big locust, and I think that imagery is actually kind of damaging to most people that aren't open to the idea of eating a whole locust. But insect-based food doesn't have to be like that at all. So really just showing people food that looks delicious, I think, can really help get people over the line, especially when it's out there in front of you. Like, we have samples outside the restaurant relatively frequently, and sampled by train stations, for example, and being able to just communicate with people about the benefits, but also showing them that the food doesn't look scary in front of them right there and then, it means it's way easier for people to get over that hurdle and try it for the first time.
Well, absolutely. I suppose, any kind of meat, you're not going to have it looking at you every time you eat it.
Yes,
so
yeah.
the same, I suppose, applies to insects as well. Obviously, you have a few things you can't discuss further, but do you have anything exciting lined up that you can disclose? Or to be confirmed? To be confirmed.
We are most recently on Oaxaca's menu in Paddington, if anyone would like to go check it out. So they've got a spiced cricket topped hummus plate. Obviously Oaxaca, from being from Mexico, they already have lots of traditions using crickets, so it's good that we can help them encourage people to try insects too.
Definitely.
In terms of other things that are upcoming, there are some large players in the space that are interested in launching. There's, I think, what I can give you is maybe like a timeline. We're looking to launch with one major brand every quarter for the rest of the year, pretty much.
Amazing.
So fingers crossed, you should see us in from everything to Asian to sandwiches to Mexican food. So yeah, should be cool.
That is exciting. Very exciting. Well, that's it. Thank you ever so much for letting us come here and chat to you about bugs.
Sweet. Pleasure.
We'll look forward to seeing them everywhere in the near future.
Hopefully in food format.
Wow. Thank you for joining us for this episode of Beyond Food and Wine, a Le Cordon Bleu podcast. Keep up to date with all our news and episodes by following us on social media or by signing up to our newsletter. Links are included in the episode notes. Until next time, à bientôt!